Right, thank you very much, everybody, and welcome to the Shadow West North Hants O&S Scrutiny Committee for the 12th of January. We have a busy agenda tonight. We're going to be looking at the budget, and I'd like to welcome many of the officers that have come along with us this evening. We have Anna Earnshaw, George Candler, just going through here, Councillor Rebecca Breeze, who's the portfolio holder for finance, Martin Henrys, 151 officer, Andrew Hunkin, the monitoring officer, Paul Heimers, who is a strategic financial advisor. Can't think of if I missed anybody off. I think we've got all the officers, and Alex and Tracy from Democratic Services. So welcome everybody, and we'll begin with apologies, please, Tracy.
We have no apologies, Chair.
Right, thank you. And do we have any notifications of requests to address the meeting from the public?
No, we have none.
No, thank you. Members' declarations of interest? Emma, is that a declaration, or you put it? No, thank you.
Nobody's indicating, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, can we go through the minutes quickly? At the last meeting, we were looking at the ICT preparedness report, the unitary website development, and communications and engagement one-day residents integrated marketing plan overview. Has everybody had a chance to look at the meetings and look at the minutes, and are you happy with those?
Great.
Dermot, happy? Yes. Alan?
Great.
Agreed? I can't see anybody worry about it. Thank you. So can we...
Councillor Ken Rich is indicating to speak.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, Ken. Yes.
Sorry, Ken, I was rather slow in responding. My concern always with the minutes is we have a long discussion in which many recommendations are made within our discussion at the meeting. And I'm looking, for example, at page 5, where we had a long list of bullet points. And it's recorded that it was merely resolved that we noted the report. Well, yeah, we did note the report, but the issue that always slightly worries me, we have noted the report, but is there not something more about needing to know whether our comments have been noted by those, in this case, concerned with ICT or whatever the issue would be? It just seemed that when we have in the minutes simply a decision that we noted a report, that could be taken to imply that we were perfectly satisfied with the report and didn't want to do anything else. It may be that we're not actually suggesting that there are particular actions to be taken, but nevertheless, there were concerns that were expressed.
Yes, I understand what you're saying there, Ken. I think maybe I'll talk to Alex and see if there's a way that we can perhaps highlight areas that we would like to actually express an opinion on. More of a recommendation rather than noting a report. Yes, thank you. Right. Apart from that, are we agreed that the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting? Thank you. Thank you. Can I just say at this point that we had a huge amount of interest shown from members on these topics. Is there anybody who would like to go along to the task and finish groups as an observer, report back to us in a more informal way? that we could include in a final report? Julie, you're indicating? Could you use the blue hand if you wish to speak? Then it helps. Is there anybody who feels that they would like to observe?
Yeah, I'll be interested in that.
James,
Yes,
and Emma. Can I? James, you've got you've got your hand up.
Sorry, I didn't know if you were just noting our indication then, Jane, or whether you were asking for commentary. I'd be happy to attend any of the task and finish groups, particularly interested in the comms side of things.
Okay. And James, is that a...
Absolutely, yeah, same for me as well. I'm definitely interested in that. And
okay. If we send out the meeting times, because they tend sometimes to be during the day. I know Ken was going to meetings at 10 o'clock in the morning. Maybe we can arrange for one or the other or both for you to go, share the meetings out, because there I think there might be more than one of the groups. Can you leave that with me and we'll get in touch?
Certainly, if we... Sorry, Jane, I was only going to say if we could have the list of all the meeting dates and times, I'd be happy to liaise directly with Councillor Hill. James, I think it was Councillor Hill that was speaking, on how we divvy those up if you would like.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right. Okay, so on to item 6, which is the finance scrutiny. Rebecca, I think, is going to introduce the budget to us, and then Martin will lead us through some of the salient points. So, welcome, Rebecca. Councillor Breeze, thank you for coming this evening. And if you'd like to just introduce the budget, and obviously it's a huge piece of work. Let us hear what you've been concerned with. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think many of you will have attended the all-member briefing, which I think was on the 22nd or 23rd of December, where we went through in a lot of detail. We went through, page by page through the budget. And so I hope many of you have got that in your mind. But what you have now is the first draft revenue budget for 21 and 22 and medium-term financial plan for the new West Northamptonshire Council. This kicked off the consultation process, which began last Wednesday for residents, local partners and stakeholders, obviously giving them the chance to comment on the proposed budget and to give us feedback. As now presented here this evening, and we'll be very interested in your comments, and that will of course come back to the budget task and finish group for final meeting, and then go on to the Shadow Authority for its decision. We'll be taking comments from you this evening, and I presume that you'll provide a written report. But for now, this report sets out the latest estimated funding position. It illustrates the budget pressures, the key risks and the challenges that influence the development of the Council's financial plans for the next financial year, as well as the ongoing financial impact of these plans into the medium term. In addition to the draft revenue budget, there are also financial plans in the budget. So these are also the dedicated schools grant, the draft public health grant, and the draft capital programme. Following the one-month consultation period, feedback will be considered. The Shadow Executive may make changes reflecting the feedback, and the draft budget is due to go to the West Northampton Shadow Authority budget meeting on the 23rd of February. In this challenging time, there's so much uncertainty. The budget, set in the context of the health emergency and its impacts on all society and our certainties, seeks to build a safe and legal plus transition from the 4 sovereign councils to the delivery of the West Northamptonshire blueprints. It includes efficiencies from a review of senior management structures and builds in resources to continue the significant transformation that's already begun in the delivery of services. And we've got Jane Carr here this evening to expand on that. The current plans assume no service reductions and build in the current capital plans of all 4 authorities. It assumes a council tax increase of 1.99% for our core activities and the full 3% social care precept increase as allowed by central government. Appendix C of the report sets out the recommendations of the Council Tax Harmonisation Task and Finish Group. After considering the 2 available options, it concluded that applying the referendum limit to the average level of current Band D rates across the authority was the most appropriate. Although the Task and Finish Group has not yet actually given a specific recommendation in the report, the group felt that a harmonisation period of between 3 to 4 years minimised the variances between the existing council tax rates required to achieve the harmonisation. So, as this is the first budget created for the new council, significant due diligence has been undertaken to create the baseline figures transferring from the 4 sovereign councils. However, there'll still be some inherent financial risks associated with the demand for services in the first year, augmented again by the uncertain health and economic impacts of COVID on our communities. And where such risks can't be mitigated through the provisional settlement, they have been mitigated by the inclusion of some prudent contingency funding in these plans. So post-vesting day, officers and the executive will work together to create a 3-year corporate plan encompassing the transformation, consolidation, efficiency, improvement and corporate priorities so that the West Northamptonshire can deliver its ambitions to be a high-functioning, sustainable authority. So in summary, the main features of this proposed budget are that it's a balanced budget. It protects existing service levels and therefore there are no reductions in any service provision. It proposes efficiency savings of circa £13 million. It proposes an average council tax increase of £6.20 per month for a Band D equivalent property when taken in context with the harmonisation proposals. It incorporates a prudent level of contingencies to mitigate against the uncertainties of the first year of operation. And finally, it preserves all current capital schemes across West Northamptonshire. So, Chair, I'll hand over now to Martin and any specific questions from your committee, and welcome to welcome any further chance to contribute. So, thank you.
Very much, Councillor Breeze. That's very interesting, and it is, to being in a balanced budget is something to, to celebrate. Martin, are you happy to go through I did send questions in based on the pre-meet that we had last week. I sent those to Anna and to Martin so that they could prepare some responses, and we have Jane Carr joining us as well to help with those discussions. And I noticed Kathy Hadley is here as well to talk on the Children's Trust. So welcome to you both as well. We also have James Smith from the county finance team. So we have huge numbers of people here to help us through this. So over to you, Martin, and we'll...
Thank you very much, Chair. So as Councillor Bree said in the introduction, we did a all-member briefing just before Christmas where we took members through a lot of the detail that was then publicised the next day when the draft budget report was published. So we went through that level of detail in that member briefing session. So hopefully members have had the benefit of that, or the majority of members on this committee meeting have had the benefit of that, and also had an opportunity to look through all of the detail paperwork that's going out in relation to the draft budget. And there is an awful lot of detail there. Rather than walk you page by page through the report, I thought it was probably better to ask any questions, to see if you've got any questions, and then for us as officers to respond to those. But as the Chair has said, we have been provided with a number of questions initially. So I will go through those. I'll read out what the questions were, which have been sent in to us for consideration. I'll give you a response for each of those questions where I can, and if I can't, ask the relevant officers to come in and respond and comment on them. They break down really into 3 or 4 themes. One is in relation to transformation. There is a section of questions in relation to COVID funds and the use of COVID funds. There is a section of questions in relation to reserves, and there is a section of questions in relation to the Children's Trust. So what I will do is I will read back the questions that we've received ahead of this meeting, and then as officers will just respond to each of those and obviously take any further questions as we go through. So starting with transformation, the first question related to wanting to know more about the transformation programme. So what's in the revised programme and what makes up the cost of 2.9 million each year for the transformation team. So the 2.9 million primarily is the cost of staff in the transformation team. We think that we'll need about 52 posts in relation to transformation to ensure that we can deliver all the transformation that's required for West Northamptonshire, and importantly to deliver the savings set out within the draft budget plans. So the majority of that 2.9 million actually relates to staffing costs. There is a small budget in there of about 20,000, and that will deal with the running costs of the section. So picking up any things like IT requirements or stationary costs or mileage and expense claims and so on. There is a small spending budget in there for that. But the majority of that 2.9 million is the cost of running that transformation team so the transformation can be delivered. So that was the first question. I'll ask at the end of this section, I'll ask Jane to come in and provide any further comments that she'd like to in relation to transformation as the Director of Transformation. But if I just go through the questions first of all, and then Jane can come in at the end and pick up any further points that she wants to highlight. So the second question in relation to transformation, the draft budget plans set out plans for a further 500,000 funding stream for transformation projects effectively. And the purpose of this particular pot of money is to use it as an invest to save scheme, where officers come forward and they say, we think we can make savings of this amount of money, but actually we need a bit of money to start that process and go. We need to invest first of all, but if we invest this amount of money, we believe that we can deliver this amount of ongoing saving going forward. So what we've done is we've set up a fund of £500,000, which we'll fund through earmarked reserves, and we will seek business cases to come forward, which will be considered by myself and Jane in consultation with the finance portfolio holder. And where it's clear that there is an ongoing, and we are confident that the budget savings can be delivered going forward, but where it's clear that there's budget savings coming out of those proposals, we will have a look at that business case and potentially release some of that 500,000 if they need some seed funding, if they need some funding up front to help to deliver ongoing revenue savings. So that's the purpose of that fund. It's an investor save fund. It will only be released once we're happy with the business case. It will only be released if it can be demonstrated that it will contribute ongoing savings that are greater than the initial investment that's required. So that was the second question that we received in relation to transformation. And then the third question related to the priority services which needs to be brought together to produce more efficient operating models. So almost which services will be looked at first of all, and Jane will be able to come in and comment on that in a couple of minutes' time. It then went on to say what's the projected cost and savings. So in terms of the savings built into the draft budget, there are two specific savings being brought into these plans. One is in relation to the senior management savings. So across West Northamptonshire, in the current arrangements, there were 4 chief executives. Going forward for West Northamptonshire, there will be 1 chief executive as an example. So therefore, there are savings relating to those other 3 posts being taken out. You apply that same logic to directors, and you can begin to estimate what you think the senior management savings will be. So built within the plans are senior management savings of 1.9 million, which reflects those savings where we can take out a number of senior management posts and deliver a significant saving as a result of that. In addition to that, there's a further 1.8 million, which is being built into the budget, which is the saving that's being built into the budget in terms of when we begin to bring services together. So in some areas, we will have 3 lots of services, or in some cases, 4 lots of services, which are doing similar things. And you would expect that as you bring those services together, you can reduce duplication, replication even, and you can begin to drive savings out. And we've estimated that saving will be a further 1.8 million. The cost of doing that, so at this point in time, it's the cost of the transformation team is responsible for helping to deliver those savings going forward, which is the first part of this question. So they were the three questions that we had in relation to transformation. I will pause there and ask Jane to add any further comments that she might want to. And then obviously if members have got any queries, we can seek to address those as well.
Thank you, Martin. So I just wanted to add a little bit on the first and the third question. Part of the question is, what is the revised programme? So just to help members understand where we are with transformation, what should have happened in the extended year is that a number of pieces of transformation work should have come forward and been delivered within that year. Unfortunately, that's when COVID hit, and what happened is that pushed the transformation sideways. So a lot of the resource was used to respond to COVID, had to be used within services, and we didn't have the same capacity to deliver that transformation in the extended year. So that means that the transformation project and the priorities have been pushed to after vesting day. In answer to question 3, which is the part about which are the priority services, we've got 3 main areas that we're looking at the moment, and we're working with the members task and finish group for transformation to set these priorities in an order. The 3 main areas are tier 4, which is the next level down from the AD level that we're looking at the moment. And that is because we need to make sure that that management level is efficient and that we've got the right people in the right place heading up the right things. Second part would be hosted services. So whilst there isn't necessarily efficiencies, we still need to separate the services that have agreed to be hosted over a 12-month and some over an 18-month period. So we'll need to address that in years 1 and 2. And then on top of that, we've got the aggregation of district and borough services and also kind of corporate service. So things like communications, things like finance, which are all working in separate teams at the moment. They will need to operate obviously together as one team. And there is obviously that needs to happen after vesting day. So those are the areas that we'll be concentrating on in the first kind of year 1 to 2, possibly into year 3. I can't tell you which order the services are going to be done in because we haven't finalised that piece of work with the transformation task and finish group, but it is based on a number of considerations such as impact on staff, impact on finances, also impact on the customer. So, and there's a number of principles that are being set under that we can bring back to you later on when that piece of work is finalised.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll take any questions to either Martin or Jane on this. Dennis, Councillor Meredith, you have your hand raised.
Last night, overviewing scrutiny on the Borough Council, the question was asked, are they going to transfer the living wage over to West Northamptonshire? Can you answer that question? What is happening on that specific thing, whether we're going to have the living wage?
Right. Who's that for, do you think? Martin? Anna?
Yes. So within the budget plans, there is provision to pay the national living wage where it's applicable.
Right. Okay, thank you. Ken, Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if you could say a little bit more about the savings that you anticipate, because you won't have so many senior staff. You know, at one level, it seems very, very obvious that if you have one organization rather than 3.5, you won't need as many managers. But managers actually fulfill a function. Are you satisfied that by doing without so many people who are in senior positions, you will still have the capacity to take initiatives, to launch new projects, to respond to things, as well as making sure that the senior management that remains is not so completely overwhelmed by the numbers and range of teams that they need to line manage. I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, and whether the figure that you have given of 1.9 million, whether that takes account of the extra senior posts that you will need to create in the structures of the Children's Trust or in other services where perhaps the senior manager is within the Northants area, and indeed extra managers may need to be recruited.
Right.
Perhaps Chair start by responding, if that's okay, to Councillor Ritchie on that one, and maybe Martin can come in too. I think, so first of all, the trust is an entirely different thing. It's quite important that members understand that. They have a fixed contract price that includes a management establishment and an overhead for their senior management. What they do with that budget is within their gift as a separate and independent business, and it has to be. So when I talk about senior management, and Martin does, we are talking about the rest of the council services. I know Martin will say to you as well. So we have put in some saving because we recognise at the very top level that we know we definitely have too many managers because we're consolidating so many services and so many councils. We also have a corresponding saving in for a similar amount to the cost of for extra staff that may be needed where there's some diseconomy of splitting, for example, the county services into North and West too. But we purposely at this stage have not assumed further savings yet in the layers below, because we're very clear that we need the directors in place, we need the ADs in place, and then we need to drive transformation. And as you rightly say, that may well be that directors with their ADs want to invest in services, want to grow things, recognise actually they need more talent in some areas than others. So we've made no presumption at this point, and that's exactly the kind of transformation and aggregation opportunity that Jane was talking to, that we will work through. So we absolutely do not want to remove the skills that we've got and water those down. We want to make sure we keep the right people, and then we hit all our priorities. So we have built in that working assumption.
Thank you. Jane, is there anything else you'd like to add to that, in answer to Ken's point?
No, that's fine. I think Anna's answered it perfectly. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Right, is that okay, Ken? Anything else? No. Right. We have Councillor David Smith, then Emma Roberts. So David.
Thank you. I don't know if I missed it because I wasn't listening, so apologies if that's the case. So how long is it expected for the transformation team to exist is the first question. And the second question is the 13 million yearly saving. Does this include or exclude the cost of the transformation team?
Okay, so in terms of the transformation team existence, it's a permanent structure. So the idea is that transformation is constantly worked on across all of the services through the organisation. It becomes part almost of business as usual because we should be consistently doing that. We also know in terms of other unitary authorities, it has taken a long term and a number of years to get full transformation in place. So some of them are still working on it up to 10 years later. So it's just to give you some context. I think the other part to that is that team is designed to flex and grow with also some fixed term capacity if we need to, dependent on what projects and programs we have in place, and if there is a good case to invest because we're going to make long-term revenue savings or income generation, or there's other really good quality and business opportunities, then we'll be looking to use that team for that as well. Sorry, and it was the second part to the question.
Through you, Chair, I think there was a question about the cost of transformation, whether it's part of the £13 million efficiency savings or not. It's not part of that. The efficiency savings are the efficiency savings, and so therefore we don't net the cost of the transformation team off that. We include that in another part of the budget proposals. So when you go through the appendices, you'll see Appendix B5 talks about technical changes, and within that you've got the cost of the transformation team, and you've got the transformation investment fund included within that as growth items.
Right. Thank you. That's it. Do you want to supplement on that, David, or are you happy?
Well, so I'm happy, but not at the moment, no.
Okay, thank you. Emma, Councillor Roberts, and then Councillor Pritchard, Ken Pritchard.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions. First one, I'd just like to follow up on the living wage comment. It's great to hear that there's provision within the budget so that all employees will be paid the national living wage. Does that take account, though, of a living wage accreditation? So actually the organisation becoming a living wage accredited employer, which is obviously, as from a Northampton Borough Council perspective, that is a motion that was passed by the borough for something that we wish to achieve. And it is also a recommendation of the Food and Poverty Scrutiny Panel report that was released at the end of last year. And then the second question relates to the transformation being budgeted for. So if we're not sure yet what order things are going to be done in and how things are going to be removed and how that transformation or disaggregation or aggregation of services occurs, this might just be my naivety, but how can we then budget for that, or how have we estimated the savings that will achieve?
Who's going to take that one?
Okay, so if I start on that,
Martin,
so
thank you.
Through you, Chair, in relation to the accreditation, there's been no formal assumption that it'll be an accredited body going forward. You know, the assumption within the draft budget proposals are that the national living wage will be paid, but we haven't assumed that they'll be, as an organisation, will be accredited to the national living wage. Doesn't mean that won't happen, but that's not an assumption that's underpinned and inherent within the draft budget proposal at this point in time. Your second question was in relation to how we built an assumption on what the set transformation savings could be going forward. So in relation to the two elements that I talked about earlier on, the senior management savings we can quantify relatively accurately, because we know what the senior management team will be going forward. We know what the existing cost of the senior management teams were. We compare one against the other, and that gives us that £1.9 million saving, which we can feed into the draft budget. We have to, any budget is based on assumptions. So when we are bringing 3.5 sets of services together, in some cases, we would expect to make a saving, and the assumption within these proposals is that when we bring services together, there will be a 5% saving in relation to those services. So it's an assumption at this point in time. Budgets are based on a set of assumptions. We think it's fairly prudent to have a level of saving of that level, and that generates the further 1.8 million in relation to transformation savings that we talked about earlier.
Chair, could I just come back on that very briefly? I understand that you have to make assumptions, or I'd rather call them predictions. I think that you have to make predictions, but where's the detail on those predictions? So how you're much better qualified than me to do that, I'm sure, but it'd be great to be able to see how that's come about. Now, that might have been something that was done at the Task and Finish group, so forgive me if I've got that incorrect, but seeing detail around how those predictions have come together would be really useful to help scrutinise the budget.
Certainly, and we can absolutely share that working paper with you. I can give you, on that particular point, I can give you an indication of the assumptions that fed into that figure. And when we look at the cost of services and the cost of total employee budgets across districts and boroughs, and so ignoring the county council ones at the moment, they come to about £40 million, and we applied a 5% target or assumption in relation to that. So that's where that figure has come from.
And you'll be able to share some of that detail with us, will you, Martin?
I'm more than happy to share the working paper that sits behind
working
that.
Paper.
It doesn't say much more than I've just expressed, but I'm more than happy to share if you'd like to see it.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Pritchard, Ken, you have a question. You need to unmute, Ken.
There we are.
There you are.
In regards to 6.2, when you talk about majority of the disaggregation principles have been agreed, but you also state there's a significant amount of them that have not been actually agreed yet, particularly some very significant ones. I find it quite strange where you haven't agreed some of these disaggregation principles, and how would that affect the budget when these come out?
So So in response to that question, Chair, I'd say the vast majority of the principles have been agreed. There are just a small number of disaggregated principles that need to be finalised. And if I give you an example, the split of earmarked reserves and general fund balances, for example, the assumption flowing through this at the moment is that they will be split 50-50 between West and North, but we accept that we need to do a bit more work on that in terms of is that the fairest split, because what will flow from that is the actual amount of cash that the two new authorities will start with. So there are, I think, 4 or 5 issues that are outstanding in relation to those disaggregation principles that need to be finalised, which we are working hard to address and move forward. The majority of all the other disaggregation principles have been agreed, and the budget has been based on those.
And one other question in similar sort of vein, on 6.25 you quote that the Sovereign Council's audits haven't taken place yet. If they haven't taken place, surely, you know, until they're agreed, you haven't really got a baseline.
I agree with that well, I agree with that point in relation to things like reserves, which we've talked about, but that's no different than any other financial year when you're setting a budget. Because what we're in the situation of at the moment is, if we look at West Northamptonshire, we've got the County Council and the Borough Council accounts, which still need to be signed off by the auditors for 18-19 and 19-20, and we are partway through 2021 at the moment, so we can't close the current year's accounts. For Daventry and South Northants, the accounts need to be signed off by for 19-20. Until we actually have signed off all the accounts, all of those accounts, until they've been through the formal audit and the auditors have signed them off, and until we've prepared the current year's accounts, because we can't prepare them yet because we're partway through the year, we will never know for certain what the starting position will be in relation to reserves and balances, for example. Now, that's no different to any sovereign authority when they set their budget, because what they will be doing when they set their budget is they'll be assuming a level of reserves at the end of the current financial year. Those accounts won't have been closed down, so they can't say with certainty that's what the reserves will be, but they can make an estimate of them, and that will feed into the budget plans, because obviously the budget plans for the forthcoming year need to be determined partway through the existing year. So you're always in that chicken and egg situation whereby you can't for certain say what the reserves will be. What we can do, and what we do is we can estimate what those reserves will be for when we're setting the budget for next year. And what we've done is we've gone out to each of the sovereign authorities, we've gone out to the CFOs, and we've said, can you give us an estimate of what you think your earmarked reserves, your general fund balances will be at the end of this year? And we rely and fall back on those estimates, which is the right approach and no different to the approach that any sovereign authority would take. So we can't with certainty say this is the level of reserves we will have, but we can say with a degree of certainty this is what we expect to have. And when we look at the reserves, and it's a question that comes up later on, they are relatively sizable for West Northamptonshire, so don't give me a particular concern in that respect. We're not running out of reserves.
Okay, thank you, Martin.
Councillor Banbridge Dermot, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. I think they're for Martin. Evening, Martin.
Hello.
They're both regarding possible costs or reclaiming costs of the formation of the authority, and I think there's about £5 million possibly involved in this. The first one's due to the pooling. Some years ago, the authorities discussed pooling, and I know, Martin, you were heavily involved in it at the time, and I believe Northampton Borough didn't join into it. And it's obviously one of the things, I don't know if disaggregation is the right word in this context, but what's the financial implication on that going to be? That's my first question. And the second one is related to audit fees. I think there's probably about £1 million worth of audit fees. Are we likely to be able to reclaim these? Thank you.
Okay, and through you, Chair. So in relation to those 2 questions, pooling, yeah, is very relevant. What happened previously was that you could consider a business rates pool across the whole of Northamptonshire. Now, the way that business rates pooling worked is you have a baseline that's been set. If you have growth, if you have business rate growth, so you grow your businesses above that baseline, you get to keep some of that funding, and you but also you potentially have to pay a levy on some of that funding across the government. Now, what you can do when you get into pooling is you can look at the best combination of authorities in terms of keeping that levy to a minimum, so you keep as much in the county or in the area as possible. It's true that the pool across Northamptonshire didn't include Northampton Borough, and as a result of that, it meant that we got to keep more business rates going forward. When you then split into West Northamptonshire and North Northamptonshire, you could take the decision, or you could agree with North Northamptonshire to continue to have a pool, but you couldn't keep Northampton Borough out of that pool, because of course they are part of West Northamptonshire, so they aren't a separate single sovereign authority, and you can't take a decision in relation to them in terms of keeping out of the pool. Now, what all of that means is, whereby previously under the pooling arrangements in this current year, for example, there was no levy to pay on business rate growth. Going forward, there will be a 33% levy to pay, and as a result of that, then we will be £4 million worse off, which I think is an unintended consequence in actual fact. So you're right. That's one of the issues that we've picked up and we've raised with MHCLG. The second issue relates to audit fees, and built within the draft budget plans is the cost of not just audit fees, but actually closing the accounts down in each of the sovereign authorities and across the whole of Northamptonshire. We estimate that will be about £1 million, and that's split 500,000 to the west and to the north at this point in time. So again, a cost relating to old sovereign or current sovereign authorities, but nevertheless a cost that we will need to incur.
Is there any way that we, through you, Chair, any way that we can recoup these or fight our corners to try and get that money back to us?
I think we can continue to raise the issue as we're doing this evening, and but there is, and that's what we're doing. You know, we are continuing to raise the issue where we can to seek to get some additional funding in to compensate us for these unexpected costs.
Thank you, Chair. Can I come in?
Yes, Rebecca, do come in.
We have monthly meetings with MHCLG, and this is raised constantly, as well as letters have gone from our MPs and from the executive, and we are constantly pushing for this to be addressed, with no great success so far, but we're not going to let it drop.
Okay, it seems to be an ongoing discussion then. Thank you. Is that okay, Dermot?
Yes, thank you. I just hope we're successful.
Yes, yes, indeed. Julie, Councillor Davenport, question.
I think I might have tied myself up in knots here. However, I'm just a bit, it's with the use of capital receipts, with Next Generation, you know, we had a bit of problem with that because of using capital receipts for transformation that wasn't transformation. And I'm glad to see that here at 6.12, we will be considering, you know, the full authority when we decide that, you know, we will make decisions with all of us on that. However, in addition, it's got at the 6.8 about the money, which I think for this year, next year, or for next couple of years, is going to be over 6 million out of earmarked reserves. And then it also states about transformation costs. Some of them will, for adult social care, will come out of earmarked reserves. I suppose I'm just confused because first of all, it says earmarked reserves, and then it says the capital, you know, funding programme that it will be funded by. So can you just sort of break that down a little bit so I can understand that more, please?
Yeah, of course I can, through you, Chair. So the approach within the draft budget report is we highlight what the cost of transformation will be. We take the cautious approach, which is we say we will fund it through revenue reserves, through earmarked reserves, and that's what paragraph 6.8 is referring to, because it's talking about the total cost being 3.4 million, and it's talking about we will, within this, the assumption at this point in time is that we'll fund that through earmarked reserves. It then goes on to, the report then goes on to describe something called the future use of capital receipts. And this is where the confusion could come in, because whilst we've taken that cautious approach of funding all of those costs through the revenue account, we do have an option to look at transformation costs and potentially transfer them across into and fund them through capital receipts. Now, to do that, we would need to have a future use of capital receipts policy, which would be a full authority decision. And so for that reason, because that decision hasn't been taken yet, the assumption is they're funded through revenue reserves. What we would want to do going forward is, if we have got legitimate costs, which we can, transformation costs as an example, which we think we can transfer into and fund through capital receipts, if we get this future use of capital receipts policy approved, we will transfer those costs from revenue into capital. Now, the reason we do that is that doesn't save us any money in itself, but the reason that we would do that is we would then free up revenue reserves, which we can use more flexibly going forward for a variety of things. So the report is trying to say, we are assuming that this cost of 3.4 million at this point in time will be funded through revenue earmarked reserves, but we will look at transferring those costs into capital if we are able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right, do we have any more questions on transformation? Councillor Penny.
Jane, thank you. Well, listening to everybody talking about millions, I'm just wondering if my question is actually a much lighter one. Reading through all the budget, I had to stop at page 40, where you mention fees and charges, and the amount of 27 million that the draft budget generates. I'm speaking now with my chair of licensing cap on, and I'm just wondering if perhaps one of the officers could explain it to me. How much information have the people who've done this draft budget, how much information do they actually have about licensing? Because of course it's rather it's not exactly complicated, but it's a bit bitty. You get charges for cabs, private hire, and everything else relating to licensing. And of course, we have at the moment 3 different areas. We've got South Northampton and Daventry, or I'm assuming charging their own amounts. And the question I'd like to ask is, what sort of rates have been worked out for this draft budget for the various things, like I say, private hire or cabs? I really would like to know what the figure is that you're thinking in relation to the licensing, because of course we need to make sure that the new council has funding, but equally the charges relating to this are somewhat different to everything else, because whatever the charges are, it will relate to the lives of the various taxi drivers, of which we have many. Could one of you please just explain it to me a little bit? And do any of you know, with this draft that you've done, whether it is considering having one large licensing committee, or whether it is going to stick to the 3, and how you're going to do that? I'd like a bit more information, please, about this. I don't know which one of you can tell me, but I'd really like to know what part of this 27 million, which is an enormous amount, and I can't believe that the licensing brings in very much at all, but it's rather more complicated until you're involved in it. It's rather more complicated than it looks, because of course, for all the meetings, you have to have solicitors. So they're being paid, and all the officers we have, and then the charges that are made to the various private hire, the cabs, and everything else to do with licensing, pubs, the whole lot. Could somebody just talk me through it, please?
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to kick this.
Right, thank you, Martin, because it may involve more than licensing, mightn't it, in terms of fees and charges?
Yeah, okay. And I completely agree with the councillor. It's really, really complicated and complex in terms of the number of fees and charges across all of the 4 authorities, and trying to come up with a set of fees and charges where some will be harmonised, some don't have to be harmonised. But there is a huge amount of, or there is some work that's taking place already. There is still some work that's continuing in relation to that. So I don't have an answer this evening in relation to that. I can tell you where we are, and paragraph 11.2 makes reference to it. I think when we originally pulled together all the information on fees and charges, it was brought together in a single list. It showed every single fee and charge for each of the 4 sovereign authorities, including the County Council, and then it had over 1,600 different individual lines in it. We then started getting into mapping that across into the same category of service. So what are licensing fees being charged for in Northampton, in Daventry, in South Northampton, etc., and started bringing that information together. We, at this point in time, are in close contact with service leads to understand some of the intricacies that you've talked about and referred to just there. And as part of the final budget proposals, we will bring back a schedule on fees and charges. Some of them will be harmonised because some of them have to be harmonised, but some of them won't be harmonised for the first year. So we are very much still work in progress on this particular issue, which is what the report makes reference to. In terms of general uplift on fees and charges, we built nothing into the budget for that, specifically so because we weren't in a position actually to include that at that point in time.
Right. I suppose it's because here at 11.3 you said it's going to be harmonised in April. And I'm just wondering what plans you have for that.
And yeah, and the ones that will be hard, there are some that have to be harmonised, and there are others where you don't have to harmonise them if there is good reason or justification not to harmonise them. And that's the piece of work we're doing at the moment, where we are identifying those that have to be harmonised, and then we'll have a separate set of fees and charges for those that don't need to be harmonised.
Yes. Is it possible, as you're going through this, for me to have various information? Because it is something that interests me enormously. And I've been doing this now for quite a while, and I would really like to be kept abreast of whatever you're doing, if that's possible, please.
Absolutely fine, Councillor. Yeah, no problem at all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Anna, did you want to come in here?
Yes, sorry, thank you through you, Chair. Just to add to that on the governance side of things, the draft constitution is being worked up, and as you may know, Councillor Flavor, there is a task and finish group for governance. So the arrangements in terms of committees for licensing and planning and all of those things are being worked up as part of that, and will go through the process of all councils, so you can see what the proposal is for those as well and how we oversee it going forward.
Right, thank you. Andre, you have a question.
I do. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got a couple of points. One relates to 7.22 and the COVID contingency, where can I just ask a question? So before I go any further, are we going through this section by section, or can I ask a question that's out of the sort of point we were discussing earlier on?
We are going to deal with COVID and related budget lines at a later stage. Andre, have you got another question on the transformation?
Yeah, I do. In terms of transformation, from that point of view, is it, or are there any restrictions in terms of match funding that transformation, or are there any encouraged points whereby either working with other partners we would be able to leverage in additional funding, or schemes that were being match funded would take priority over others that weren't? May I ask that question?
Jane, is that something that you could look at?
Yep, certainly. So in terms of approach with external partners, that's absolutely part of my remit. So one of the key elements that I have is strategic partnerships, and part of my role will be to develop those external partnerships, partnership projects and programs, and looking to get a more system-wide approach to transformation, so we're not doing it in isolation. Obviously, the priorities in the first couple of years will put pressure on us to deal with the hosted and the aggregation of the services we have, but also we will be talking to partners at the same time. Sorry, could you just give me the second part to that question?
Yes, I mean, thank you, Jane. What, in terms of the priorities perspective of that, would that effectively take a higher priority as opposed to schemes that were not being match funded?
Not necessarily. So in terms of how we're prioritising things, obviously there's some key items that we've agreed to through the member governance process already, such as hosted being disaggregated within 12 months, some of them slightly longer, but we've got pressure to do those. Also in terms of efficiency, we'd have to balance where there's match funding against efficiencies or income generation that can happen from other transformation projects. The way that we'll do that is through the business case approach. So we'll be tracking all of the benefits on transformation projects all the way through, and we'll be assessing at every stage when we start a project, or if we take a project forward, what is a priority based on a number of criteria. So if match funding was one of those criteria, it's going to bring us a better return than another project, we'd be looking to prioritise that, but it would absolutely be based on a number of criteria.
Thank you, Jane. And can I ask, who effectively would oversee then that distribution of empowering element there? So at what point in time would it come back to members for onward consultation, or would it be something that's decided by officers?
So do you mean in terms of priority, or are you talking about the 500,000?
No, the actual, if you like, the award of schemes. Is there an award panel that's being set up? Is there a transformational panel? You know, at what point in time is there effective engagement from a wider remit?
So at the moment, the process would be myself and Martin have authority to agree those in consultation with the portfolio holder for finance at the moment. So that's the process currently that would be set.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Jane. That's very helpful.
Thank you. Emma, one question, and I think we need to move on after this.
Thank you. You made a comment earlier in respect of asking the sovereign authorities what reserves they anticipated they would have left. It just occurred to me to ask when we asked that question, and if we asked it some time ago, have we revisited it very recently in preparing this, obviously based on the position that we're in and that the lockdown situation is likely to diminish those reserves.
We do have a section on questions on reserves coming up, Emma. Are you happy to leave it to that point?
You can if you want to. I think Martin mentioned it a moment ago that's what he'd asked, which is why the question came up.
Martin, do you want to deal with that now?
Yes, so through you, Chair, regularly we ask for updates on those figures, and we ask for an update just before putting together the draft budget reports. So we do it on a regular basis.
Okay. Right, well, if there's no more questions on transformation, I think we'll move on to COVID, because we had a lot of questions in our pre-meeting on how the funds are going to be used, how much has come to the boroughs, the district and the county, and what the future use of these funds is going to be put to. So, Martin, are you going to take us through this again?
Yes, I will do, Chair.
Thank you.
So yes, there are a number of questions in relation to COVID. The first one was, what is the total of government COVID grants to sovereign councils? So obviously that relates to this financial year, not to 21-22. And whilst the county have received a number of smaller, more specific grants in relation to things like care home support, food support for vulnerable families, winter support grants, and testing and outbreak management, the main tranches of COVID funding, general COVID funding, came in 4 tranches. So just to give you an idea of the total amounts received for each of the sovereign authorities, they are as follows. So Daventry in total, the total of the 4 tranches received for general COVID funding from the government was 1.157 million. Northampton received just over 4 million, 4.023 million. South Northamptonshire received just short of 1.2 million. So in total, the district and borough allocations so far in this current financial year is 6.356 million. The County Council for 2021 in total has received 43.7 million in total additional funding to deal with the COVID pandemic. So that was the first question. I think I've also included, or it's worth highlighting, if we look forward to 21-22 within the provisional settlement, and again just highlighting these are provisional figures, the amount that's been allocated for West Northamptonshire at this point in time totals 12.65 million in terms of additional government funding, broken down between general COVID support of 9.5 million and then COVID in relation to LCTRS of 3.1 million. There is another amount of national funding which hasn't been allocated yet. The total figure nationally is 762 million, and this is in relation to the irrecoverable collection fund losses that we're suffering, and which will have an impact in future years. But the allocation for that hasn't been announced just yet, but we would expect to get a further additional amount in addition to the 12.651 million for next year that I mentioned just a minute ago. So that was the first question in relation to COVID. The second question was the long-term effects of COVID on health, education, employment, the economy and poverty are unquantifiable at present. How much of these government grants will transfer to West Northamptonshire Unitary Authority? So it follows on from that previous question really, and the answer to that is if there is any of that funding left at the end of this current financial year, specifically in relation to Daventry, South Northampton, Northampton, that will automatically transfer across into West Northamptonshire. Any of the funding that's left in relation to the county council would transfer across as well, but would need to be split between West and North, and there would need to be agreement in terms of what that split would be. So any unspent funds, any unspent COVID funds would end up in West Northamptonshire, but obviously the split for the county council element would need to be agreed as part of that. So that's the second question. The third question related to is there a COVID recovery plan, and will any current and future grants be ring fenced? So I think Hannah will come in and make a comment about the COVID recovery plan in a minute's time or so. Current and future grants should be ring fenced for COVID. We've received them for a specific purpose. We should allocate them to dealing with the crisis, and we would expect to do that going forward. So I'll invite Hannah in to comment on the COVID recovery plan, and then we can open it up for any further questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anna, if you could come in there.
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose I should say the one thing, and Martin will be aware of this as well, this is a constantly changing figure. The government is always announcing more money coming through. We've just had further confirmation this week of more funding. So this is constantly being topped up at the moment. Equally, obviously, we're having to pay it out too. There are some funds actually which are ring fenced, which Martin's mentioned, that have to be spent this year, and they will be spent this year. But there's quite a lot of that's not ring fenced and that will transfer forward. And certainly the county council has not expended all of its money. And in our current tier 4 situation, we also get a per month per population head amount of money that keeps coming in for every month we remain in tier 4. So it is quite a complex picture, just to overlay what Martin said. In terms of the recovery plan, we've had a recovery plan in place and being worked on for some time. That started as we dipped into the summer after the first wave. And that was looking at a number of things, what had worked well and we wanted to keep and build on. So as a good example, remote working by staff and the ability to be more flexible is an obvious example. We also picked up some really interesting ideas which we've continued with around integrated working between housing and adults, around homelessness, all of those sorts of things which we've continued to work on. Obviously, we spotted some things that didn't work so well, and we've been addressing those too as we go. And what we've tried to do is in every single programme area of the transformation is pick up opportunities from COVID and other areas to make sure they then get built into the plans going forward. The big unknown one, and I know George has been heavily involved as well on the west side, is the economic recovery. We're doing a lot of work at the moment, which is quite complex for the district and boroughs around getting grants out to businesses. There's also work going on with some of the big forums, and the stakeholder groups, as you'd expect, about work to help people channel shift, work to help them think about repurposing their businesses, advice, etc. So we're doing a number of those things. It's fair to say at the moment, the main focus is getting out any funding that's available to support economic recovery that we can. But we have active groups for the north and the west that are working on that economic recovery plan. But it is safe to say that certainly the thoughts about areas we need to improve and what we need to keep have been embedded in all the work we have going forward. It is obviously a very challenging situation, but I'm confident that we are still very much maintaining that plan and working towards improving things going forward.
All right, thank you, Hannah. I'd just like to come in here quickly, because the two areas that are the high spending areas, there's life and limb services within the council, children's service and adult social care. They are going to be very, we don't know what the situation is going to be post-COVID, and the effects of COVID could last many, many months, even years. Certainly with young people, the effects are going to be felt, for many years. This is a budget. This is an opportunity to build a budget for that sort of long-term future with our residents and our communities. And I was wondering what sort of work is being done in that area, because I understand that the operational, the strategic, the way that the council works, has been impacted hugely by COVID, and there may be opportunities here to change things, to do things differently. But if we're dealing with people and it's a demand-led service, both the adults and the children's, we don't really know what that demand is, and yet we are putting a budget together to deal with something that is unforeseen, if you like. I was just wondering what your comments were on that.
So thank you, Chair. So in both cases for children's and adults, we have, as you would expect, been monitoring all along the impacts of COVID. Sadly, far more in adults, as you would expect. We've lost a lot of customers, and we have been looking at weekly how that's changing things. Some of our service demand has gone up. It won't surprise you to know, for example, mental health demand has gone up for care. And we have accordingly built extra budget into the adults budget for next year to cover that increased pressure. But we know enough already to be able to model some of that demand. We've looked backwards and we've looked forwards, and we have built in what we believe will happen in terms of the services that we're going to need more of and the services it looks like we're going to be less of. We've obviously got a big challenge with things like our care home market, who've got a lot of vacancies and things like that. But we have done quite a detailed and scientific look and across other areas and what they're experiencing to make sure that we get the demand profile as accurate as we can. That said, we've done the same in children's. Children's probably have more of a risk of the emerging hidden harm challenge, as children came out and went to school and things became more visible. I'm pleased to say it hasn't largely materialised yet, but we do have a cover for that within the children's budget, and we have COVID contingency for them. But in both cases, we have done a lot of work on that demand modelling. And what we didn't want to do, obviously, was adjust ourselves for people either dropping out of services, because we've also found, it won't surprise you in adults, for example, that some families have said, I don't want formal care, it's too risky for my loved one, we'll look after them as the family. We don't want to then build in false assumptions that that cost of care won't come back. So we have looked at all of that demand in some detail with COVID. We've looked at the death rates and everything else to make sure that we're as accurate as possible, and we've got as much contingency cover as we can as possible. But we think that the demands we've built in are realistic. We certainly haven't ignored them and just treated this like any other year. We've done a lot of work on that, I can assure you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davenport, Julie, you have a question, and then Emma Roberts.
Thank you. Yes, my concern is obviously the people on the ground in my ward, that they're really struggling, and it is. I've noticed it getting a lot worse, and people are coming to me for help. Now, I've got an email that we all got from Matt Goslin saying that 2 million, well, just over that, from one of the grants they receive would be to provide support for those households who are most in need with the cost of food, energy and water bills. We haven't seen a penny of that. And also, as a group, the Far Cotton and Delapre Community Support Group, we desperately need that, because we have been... Gary Davenport or Gary, sorry. Because we have been helping a lot of people. So I would like to know what's happened to that. I have contacted Teresa. I've had and she fed it down to the person that was dealing with it. I've heard nothing. And the other thing is there, as you know, the scrutiny committee, could we have a breakdown of where all these funds are going, you know, to give us an idea of where the money's being fed to? Thank you.
Is that Anna or Martin?
Yep.
Who would like to come in there?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Happy to respond to that. So the grant you're talking about is the Winter Support Grant. We are the NCC contact centre on behalf of all county residents, runs the service to be able to apply for that. Any resident of the county can contact the contact centre and talk about that. It is absolutely designed, as you said, to cover fuel poverty, food poverty. And we also have a network then of voluntary groups, food banks and other things where we can support people. But that money, we're tracking that at the moment. That is, I'm happy, Councillor Davenport, to link you up with the contact centre managers managing it. But we have a weekly report of people claiming against the Winter Fund, and it is still available, and we are still supporting people.
Well, I have contacted the contact centre myself, and I had a response. They didn't know anything about it. All they knew about was the £500 that people can claim if they're on furlough, and that was it. But this email we've got gives you the impression that it will help everyone.
It is, sorry, I think maybe the confusion, I could be wrong, is that it's the county council's contact centre, not the borough council.
Oh no, absolutely. I've got their response, yes. And they said no.
Send it on to me. Absolutely, there is a grant for that, and they should be looking at that. And as I said, I get a weekly report of money paid out to people to support them in that situation. We also have a DEFRA grant, which is for food support, as well as the winter grant. So I don't know why somebody would say that to you. More than happy to pick it up if you want to forward it on to me.
I think it's sad that all the groups that are helping the COVID, the official COVID group, the NCC and NBC do refer people to us. They've never told us about any monies we can claim. We've had to raise it ourselves.
Oh, okay. It should be on every council website that you can do that. But follow up.
We haven't been offered anything.
No, absolutely. We should link you up then. We don't. What's the point of us sitting on money that's designed to support people when? Absolutely agree.
Julie, can I suggest that you email Anna about this and get some specific information, which is clearly not being easily, transmitted. So it might be that the communications there need to be made simpler.
Well, on the other,
if that's right.
On the other point, Councillor Birch, it's just worth saying, so we do produce budget reports that talk about, in all cases, how much COVID funding we've got and the expenditure against the funds. We have to do national returns too. It's a rapidly changing picture. We're always being asked to do extra returns for extra money that's come in. But we do report that monthly and as part of the budget cycle so that you can see how that money is being spent and what's still in reserves.
Right. And are those reports public?
Yeah, absolutely public, yeah.
Good, thank you. Emma, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief question on my concern over the references to COVID within the budget were making it such a wide-ranging COVID pressures. So what is a COVID pressure? I'm sure we've all got an opinion about what different COVID pressures could be, but I was really concerned about having that a figure ring fence like that without a directive, which you might have in the background, but I don't feel like it's there, a directive of what COVID pressures, what things can be called upon to use that fund, and making sure that we do use that fund for COVID pressures rather than use it to balance budgets elsewhere.
I'm happy through you, Chair, if you want me to respond to that.
I think so.
So obviously, we put some headings in. There are a number of things. There are most of these budgets, these grants we get have conditions. So, for example, the care home ones have conditions, and we have to validate that we've correctly paid things to care homes and demonstrate that. And we also potentially would have to pay back anything not or wrongly given to people. So we have grants like that, which are very specific, which we pay out, and they'll be underwriting the market. Likewise, they'll be underwriting the market for things like loss of income and leisure facilities and some of the challenges we've got there. But the main ones that are grouped under that heading are where we can't deliver savings across the piece because we've had to pull our attention and all staff onto COVID. But you've got some slippage in savings. And the other one, the main one in there, and I'm sure Martin can add to this, will be we had a significant pressure in adults as a result of the discharges and placements made in the first wave straight into care homes, which was an unexpectedly large amount of people. We've managed to move a lot of people on, but there's a significant amount of COVID pressure as a result of their ongoing cost of care for some of those people. So generally they are against grants. And again, when we report it, we show against each grant what we spend. But when we talk about pressures in the wider sense, that's really talking about loss of income, adult social care or children's pressures, and or savings being slipped, which are all legitimate under the government's terms.
Okay, thank you. Chair, if I may very quickly, just on that, if the COVID pressure is related to a specific service or the provision of a specific service, surely, and forgive me if I'm totally incorrect there, but surely it should be allocated to that specific service, because that specific service, you're estimating that as a result of COVID, it's going to cost, this service is going to cost this much more, rather than putting that into COVID pressures.
That's true, and I'm sure Martin would say as well, that's exactly how we built the budgets. When we're presenting in terms of the national provision that we got, we needed to demonstrate specific pressures that were as a direct result of COVID over and above everything else. So we made sure that that was clear and visible in the budget, but you're absolutely right. So for example, the one I've just described is actually as part of the adults-based budget. Likewise, leisure will be carrying some of the income pressures and things like that. But it's important we presented it because at the time we were being asked by government as part settlement to make very clear what the pressures were as an overall in response to the COVID pandemic, and so that they could then respond with a COVID grant as well to make sure we could cover those pressures.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, Martin, for your description you gave of what the figures were before. I think that's the best analysis I've heard of how that money is being used. So really do appreciate that. Sorry, little one's shouting. But what I think if I had that question reading the draft budget, anybody looking at a consultation is likely to have those sorts of questions. So what I would really hope comes out of this and out of our pre-meet and out of the consultation is that things change slightly. If it's adapted, its wording is adapted slightly, or the presentation is adapted slightly to ensure that that's really clear for people.
Thank you. Thank you. Good point. Andre, would you like to come in with your question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got a couple of questions, and they centre around COVID contingency. We've obviously got the most difficult year that we're all aware of, and obviously it's been up that for now well over a year. In terms of the contingency that's been set aside, I appreciate that 12.5 million, as we just discussed, is not the overall amount because there'll be further funds to be added to that. But it does concern me that we have a very small contingency going forward, and I absolutely appreciate this is not a funding stream that we're totally secure with, but it is something that's currently within the element of our budgets that we're looking at currently. And I would really want to know, Madam Chair, if this is something that we are looking very carefully, and I really do appreciate Anna's points there, but clearly we've got something coming towards us which is absolutely going to be monumental, even further than we've had it currently in terms of the economic recovery. So we have significant long-term unemployment, and family support will be required for that. Mental health for young people, there's going to be a tremendous pressure on that service, and I absolutely presume that we are going to have a huge fallout on that. Working with community groups and even establishing them, I do feel that we have to ensure that there is a priority about working with community groups and actually supporting communities within them, because we're going to have an awful lot of people who will enter either the mental health environment or other support care environments if they don't have places and areas that they can engage with safely once obviously we are past the vaccination stage and people can go out and mix safely. We do have to have community groups, we do have to have community halls, we do have to have areas where people can absolutely mix safely. If they're not funded by the council, we will have a situation where they will not be there. My other concern in terms of that is there will be large spaces that will be available that would have been previously operating as commercial businesses. And a prime example in Abingdon Street, Northampton, we know that the current Borough Council has wisely invested into one or more of the buildings that are there to repurpose them. Is that something that will still continue going forward? And if so, should that not be, I would very much want it to be, something that's mentioned within the papers here, because the budget itself is something that people will stick to, clearly, as close as possible. And if we do not have a very strong community focus, it will be just services that the council run and not the needs of the community going forward, which I think we're going to be much greater than they are currently. People who are in lockdown, as we know, and we're all communicating in different places this evening, are very much restricted. But once people are able to get out and safely mix going forward, with the huge unemployment that there is currently and going forward, we really do need to ensure those spaces and the places are managed, maintained and enabled by the council within budgets.
Thank you. Anna, is that one for you?
Yeah, so I'll pick up a couple of things. Maybe Martin can comment on the COVID contingency. So you're absolutely right. Mental health pressure, as I said, adults, we know it's about 25% up in terms of demand. Our mental health partners are finding exactly the same thing. And remember, it's not the council that deals with children's mental health. It is our community health partner, NHFT, who are seeing a real surge. I think all the CAMs, which is the children's mental health beds, are full at the moment, and significant pressure. There's a lot of work, Councillor, going on nationally around further investment in those services, and a real recognition that mental health services as part of this recovery are going to be critical. So there's some very good and promising schemes. They've got a lot of new crisis cafes and houses and stuff open in this pandemic. They've opened up 24/7 crisis lines for children, which wasn't in place before. And the plans are to maintain those because of the pressure and support people going forward. So I completely agree on that front. It's front and centre of every conversation I have with the health chief execs as well every week. Community groups, completely agree with you. In the new structures, you may have seen in the Directorate for Adults and Housing and Communities, we've specifically called that out. We will absolutely be supporting community groups, parish and town council groups to work with us to do this. And again, going back to what we said before, some fantastic work through COVID of communities coming together. We absolutely want to invest in that. Really, really keen to do that. And we are rolling out things like adult services to those communities to join up. In the budget, we have assumed ongoing that current funding stays. And likewise for all of those projects, capital or community. So nothing is being taken out at this stage. And what we're very keen to do and have committed to do is very early in the life of the council is to set that 3-year corporate plan that Councillor Breeze talked about, where we say, well, what are our priorities then as we're coming out of this whole thing? What do we want to invest in? What do we want to grow more of, deliver more of? And that we set those and we start those early in the cycle. I think, Martin would say this is very much a bridging and covering that risk type budget, and we've got to get ourselves then into the looking forward and how we're going to help our residents and the businesses improve again and get back to the right place. So that absolutely will be the plan, but we will have a community lead and we will have a network of parish and town council people working with us as part of that real community resilience and focus going forward.
Anna, may I just ask a direct question then? And I really do appreciate and value your engagement with that directly. A plea I've had from a very important community group locally who's asked for some funding to try and replace a van that was involved in an accident effectively. And for them, it's a few thousands of pounds to replace the van. It might be something we can get hold of ourselves in terms of council structures. Going forward, something like that, how would that be dealt with, or how could we help an organisation that is helping the community and loses its main vehicle effectively to do that? I mean, is there a way, would there be a fund, if you like, that they could easily tap? I mean, I'm forever trying to signpost people to those areas and saying, well, actually, have you tried the Community Foundation? Have you tried the Borough Council? I have no empowerment councillor funding at the end of the day, otherwise it would absolutely help with it. It's those sort of areas where it's a couple of £1,000s that makes a massive difference to a small organisation, yet to a county council or to the West Northants Council, we might have a contingency fund that absolutely fits into. Can you give us some sort of direction that we could, as councillors, absolutely feel confident that there would be directly funds that wouldn't take 6 months to apply for and go through that routine, if you like.
There is an ongoing conversation at the moment about schemes like that for the executive to decide and how we do that. But I would also point you at the fact the wellbeing service, the wellbeing contract, the public health one that went through cabinet. The plan for that is to roll that out to community level grants, so that actually if there are better ways of supporting local groups to do things that are really effective and things like that are effective, then they also can apply for those and get them at a local level that matters to people in that area. But there is an ongoing conversation as well about how we might look at those kind of schemes and local funds for councillors.
Excellent, thank you. That's really helpful. It'd be very useful, Madam Chair, if we could be up to date with that, because I think that would be something that we know then wouldn't be bogged down in a whole pile of red tape, which is one thing that nobody likes anywhere. Thank you.
Yes, it's a timely access to emergency funding, I think, for communities is really important. Ken Ritchie, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you. I can be very brief. I thought of lowering my hand because much of what I wanted to say has already been raised by Andre, and for that I'm very grateful. Can I just throw in one further little question? Are we confident that when we're talking about what the demand for some of these services are likely to be, the people who have got financial hardship, who have got problems of health and mental health because of COVID, that increased demand, are we sure that that is actually the real need? I ask because I know I have been involved in a little group in Daventry, looking at how Daventry Council has responded to the pandemic. And one of the strong messages that are coming across is about the work that parish councils have been doing, some of the voluntary organisations that are scattered around the district, because they have the power to identify people who may not be in direct contact with official services, but nevertheless who have got major needs. And I think that if our little group has not formulated its recommendations yet, but one will be to put a huge amount of priority to the idea of needing to work locally, the needing to support the local structures. You've already discussed, yes, that you want to support and work with community groups, but I see that as really so important. It may be that I know there's not more to say on this, but I just felt I wanted to re-emphasize that point.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying again, Ken. Well done. Anna, have you got anything further to add on that? Or I think perhaps you've covered a lot of that, and Ken's only just endorsing Andre's comments and requests, really, which I think is something that we ought to be thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, if we don't have any more questions on the COVID matters, could we move on to reserves? And I think it's back to you again, Martin. I don't know if any of your financial colleagues would like to help you out with any of this, or whether you're going to take it all yourself.
No, I'm more than happy, Chair, to take you through this. Yeah, the third section was on reserves. So the first question in relation to reserves was, and we've covered a lot of this already, but I will just go over and answer the question directly. The question was, Sovereign Councils held substantial reserves. How much will transfer to West Northamptonshire Unitary Authority? As I said earlier, we don't know for certain because it's subject to closure of accounts in some authorities for 18-19, for all authorities 19-20, and for all authorities this current financial year. We expect there will be a minimum of £95 million worth of revenue reserves. We expect that will be split between earmarked reserves of 65 million and general fund balances of 30 million. So the general fund balances are the contingency of last resort, if you want. So that's your emergency funding, which you need to fall back on, or that you can fall back on if there are unplanned issues that you need to fund. So we expect that figure to be 30 million. I think that's sufficient going forward. And earmarked reserves are expected to be 65 million. So we're expecting a minimum of 95 million. Again, it's based on the forecast that we receive and which we get updated regularly. It is an ever-moving feast, so we know that the underspends in some of the authorities across the West are increasing. So we expect that to increase, but we keep a very close eye on that. So that's the answer to the first question. The second question then went on to say how much of these funds have been used to balance the budget. So just to provide you a breakdown of what is being used on that assumption in terms of the total funds being held. So within the draft budget plans, we've talked about the COVID contingency. There is a further general contingency of £5 million that's been set up just because of the new organisation, uncertainty associated with that. We have based the draft budget on the best intelligence we have at this point in time, but it's a brand new organisation. And so to help fund any bumps in the road, we've set up a general contingency of £5 million, which we will only draw down if we need to draw it down. And that will be done in consultation with the portfolio holder for finance. If we do need to use any of that £5 million general fund budget, then actually we will fund that through general fund reserves. So that would come off the 30 million general fund balances that I've talked about just a minute or two ago. Yeah. So that's the first amount that's assumed to be used. That's the first amount of reserves that's assumed to be used. We've talked about transformation already, and some earmarked reserves are already in place for transformation, and we are expecting to use £3.4 million of those earmarked reserves to fund the transformation team and to fund the Invest to Save fund of 500,000. The Borough Council have an enterprise zone, and some funding from that goes into an earmarked reserve, and the admin costs relating to the enterprise zone then get funded from that reserve. So there is an assumption that £661,000 worth of admin costs relating to the enterprise zone will come from the enterprise zone earmarked reserve set up for that purpose. And then the final draw on reserves is in relation to election costs. So what happens is, over a period of time, there are contributions that go from base budgets into an election reserve, so that when you get to the actual election, you've got a pot of money available to fund that election. You don't have that hit all in one year. So we think we'll have elections next year. We estimate the cost of those elections will be 560,000, and we will fund those costs of elections through the elections reserve, which has been set up specifically for that purpose. So that was the second question in relation to reserves. And then the final question was, are capital receipts being used for general funds? So this is again about the funding streams that we can use and what we can use them for. So just to be clear, we're not allowed to transfer capital receipts into the general fund. So capital receipts cannot be used and put into the general fund to fund the general fund. However, there is a bit of an intricacy, because you can have capital receipts sitting in the capital programme. You can have a look at some costs in relation to revenue costs that we're incurring. We talked about transformation earlier on. And if you agree at full authority the policy to transfer some of those costs from revenue to capital and fund them through capital receipts, then you can do it. So you can do it that way. You can transfer some costs as long as they're eligible, and transformation costs is a good example. You can transfer some revenue costs from revenue into capital and fund it through capital, but you're not allowed to transfer capital receipts into the general fund to help offset the general fund. So a slight distinction between the two. They essentially achieve the same outcome, really, but we just need to be really clear that capital receipts, you cannot take those and drop them into the general fund and fund the general fund through capital receipts in that respect. So they were the three questions that I had on reserves, Chair. So I'll pause there and see if there's any further questions in relation to any of that.
Yes. Ken Pritchard, Councillor Pritchard, you've got a question on this.
Yes, it's mainly with regards to the total capital programme by directorate. I see on there that adult communities and wellbeing, there's a draft budget of 21-22 of 2 million, and then by 2024-25 it's gone up to 8 million. Why is this?
Oh. Do you want a page reference for that?
Yes, certainly. It's page 42, 14.3.
Okay, so yeah, so through you, Chair. If I refer you to Appendix E, Appendix E provides the detail of that table, so it gives you a detailed breakdown of that summarised table. So that summarised table is doing two things. It's showing the draft programme for 21-22,
Yeah.
and then it's rolling up all of the years from 21-22 to 24-25,
Yeah.
which in total is 4 years, which gives you that 8.4 million. So if you took an average of that 8.4 million, you're looking at about 2.1 million pounds a year. So it's not jumped from 2.521 million in 21-22 right up to 8.462 million in the following year. The 8.462 million is the total over the 4-year period. In terms of the actual figures for those 4 years for adults, it's 2.521 million programme in 21-22, 2.505 million in 22-23, 2.455 million in 23-24, and 981,000 in 24-25. And if you add those four figures together, you get the 8.462 million that's referred to in the table on page 42.
It was only just that when you look at things like children's, you know, the category below it, in 21-22, it's 13 million, and then presumably that's on an annualized basis. And then when you look at the situation of 24-25, it's only gone up by 1 million.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that would be, so it goes back to, through you, Chair, it goes back to the point that was made earlier on about bringing together all the capital programmes, and that guarantees the funding for the current capital programmes going forward. And if we look at the capital programme for children's, again, going into the detail in Appendix E, in 21-22 it is 13.8 million, but then it drops right down to 277,000 in 22-23, and then at this point in time, no capital programme for 23-24 and 24-25. I think once we get into this 21-22 financial year, we'll be looking at all of the capital programme and reviewing it all anyway. So I think the important figures are 21-22, but you're right, the figure for children's is a lot lower in 22-23 and then peters out, so there's nothing in 23-24 and 24-25.
Okay,
but
thank you.
It's just bringing together the different capital programmes that are currently in existence.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, thank you. Ken Ritchie, Councillor Ritchie, you have a question.
Thank you. I'm grateful to Councillor Pritchard for pointing out that table. It hadn't occurred to me that we were talking about a 4-year period. Just so that I know that I've understood this properly, if we look at the totals, the total programme for 21-22 is around 50 million. The average total for each of the following years is going to be around about 15 million. That suggests that there is going to be a huge cutting back on many of the projects that local authorities would expect that they would need to get involved in. And I just wonder how realistic that is. I know that looking ahead, it may be that we can only see what are the demands of 21-22, because these are the things that the existing sovereign authorities have already agreed to or have already made plans for, and some of that may go forward into future years. But are we really saying that there's going to be next to nothing in the pot for new capital initiatives over the next 4 years? I mean, if it may well be the case, but if it is the case, then I think that we should be absolutely upfront and say that.
So through you, Chair, what we're saying is we are aggregating current capital programmes, which give us this combined capital programme and gives us a reasonable level of capital spend for 21-22. What we will then do with some vigour once we get into the new financial year, or probably even before then, is have a look at the overall capital programme going forward. And we didn't ask for new schemes to be bid for this year. That was a conscious decision taken because we said we just pulled together the current capital programmes, but we will go through that bidding process, we will go through that evaluation process, we will then consider all the different schemes that may come forward as part of that. We would then consider the funding side of that and how that could be funded going forward, and then we would bring further proposals back to you for from 22-23 onwards, which could well include more than you've got in the capital programme here. So I wouldn't read into this capital programme because it reduces from 49.7 million down to 6.3 the following year down to 6.2, that the capital programme is being closed down. I would read into it, we brought together all of the capital programmes, we've got a robust capital budget for next year for 21-22, and we need to review the whole process in relation to the capital programme and seek to review that going forward.
Is that any further questions on that, Ken? We're happy with the answer. Right. Come back quickly. Yes. Ken, you're muted.
My apologies, I couldn't have clicked in the right moment. I'm happy with the answer, and that I'm not arguing about the accuracy of the answer. I'm just saying that we all know from our areas of things that we feel that we know that there needs to be investment right across the whole West Northants area. You know, every parish council has got something that it feels it is going to need money for. And I think that, you know, there is nevertheless this message that it is going to be exceptionally tight to find any money for items of capital expenditure beyond what already has been put in to next year's budget. And you know, that's still the impression I'm left with, and I think that is actually an important thing for people to know.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Judy Davenport.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I had to pop out, so I might have missed something. My query with the capital programme is the infamous Section 106 funded highway schemes, because I know we've had problems with this in the past, but I thought money had been put back in the pot and all of the work was going to be done. And yet, looking at this on page 67, it says that 0 was spent 2021, but then a massive, well, it looks massive to me, over 5 million to be spent 21-22. I mean, the money's already come in from, you know, the developers. So where will I find where that pot is that's now going to fund all this highway work in 21-22? And then it's got 0 for each year. So I'm just a bit confused about that.
Apologies, Councillor Davenport. Could you point out the lines you're referring to? So I'm on page 67.
Page 67, and you go under place and economy, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4 down.
Oh, the 106 funded highway schemes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. In 0, 2021, 5.39 million, no, 539 million next year, then 0, 0.
Yeah. Because that money has been paid by developers. I'm just wondering where it's shown in the budget that we've got this lump that will then pay for all this work in 21-22.
Yeah, okay. So so there's two elements to it. The line that you've focused on there is the expenditure side of it, which is the 5.039 million, and we can get more detail to you on that in terms of breaking down a particular line and provide that to you. It's then funded, so the funding for that is at the bottom part of that page, where you can see a line called Section 106, which picks up the total Section 106 funding coming in to fund a number of those schemes, the expenditure on a number of those schemes, and that comes to 35.7 million. So you've got two elements to it. You've got the Section 106 funded schemes, which is the line you highlighted. You've got other capital programmes that are funded through Section 106. And then at the bottom of the page, you've got the Section 106 fund that we're bringing in total to fund all of those projects, and for 21-22, that's 35.727 million. But on that particular line, the 5.039 million, I can provide more detail to you on that outside of the meeting.
It would actually, because I've been looking at Section 106 for years, it would be nice to find out what each of the 3 councils are bringing across with them, because obviously they should have that money because nothing's been done this year.
I can certainly provide that information to
you.
So if I can just come in there'll be a number of schools, for example, that you won't be able to see from the Appendix E, because it doesn't allocate the funding by scheme. It just funding's at the bottom. But there'll be a number of schemes on the capital programme, for example, that are funded by Section 106.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pritchard, Ken.
Thank you very much, Chair. Looking at once again on page 67, it's rather nice to see that SNC has been quite frugal and there's not many projects there with regards to requiring capital. But just to clarify something, what about existing capital projects that each sovereign council has agreed? Does it show up on this particular calculation or this spreadsheet? Because I'm thinking of one particular project that SNC is actually undertaking at the moment, which is the purchase of the co-op store and also converting it to a car park. And there is no mention of that down there at all with regards to, West Northamptonshire capital funding.
Yeah, okay, so I can respond to that, Chair, if you're happy for me to.
Yes.
So in relation to the question about what happens to the current schemes in this current financial year, as ever, there is slippage on capital schemes, and you would expect not all of those capital schemes will be completed by the end of this financial year. What will happen is those funds that are funding those capital schemes will be moved forward, and they'll be moved forward into West Northamptonshire. So the funding will still be there and preserved for any schemes that are in the current year capital programmes in sovereign authorities that haven't completed yet. So at the end of this year, those projects don't stop. They would continue. The funding is taken forward into West Northamptonshire. So I can give you some assurance on that. In relation to SNC and the demolition of the co-op, that particular scheme is funded through revenue, which is why you won't see it on this particular schedule. This capital programme, and that scheme that you mentioned is a revenue funded project.
Okay, thank you, Martin.
Okay.
Andre, you have a question. You have a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question, if I may, probably more to George, I suppose, really, if I may, George Candler. The exciting scheme of the Northampton Northwest Relief Road, which is obviously mentioned within page 67, going forward, obviously the pressure of 17 million next year, which I think will be well spent if we can get a road. Can you tell me when that road will start?
Well, we've still got to work through the funding package, as you quite rightly point out, Andre, and then we will need to work up further designs, but we'd like to start in the autumn of next year is the plan.
Excellent. Thanks very much indeed. That's good news.
Right, if we have no further questions, I think we move on to the Children's Trust, and Cathy Hadley, Director of Children's Services. Cathy, thank you for being so patient, and unfortunately this is the last item we have on this part of the agenda, and we've got some questions for you. Martin, did you want to go through any of this to begin with, or is it straight over to Cathy? Because I think that it's very much an operational issue, isn't it?
Yeah, Chair. So if you want to read the questions out, then maybe Cathy.
Yes. Then Cathy can come in. Yes, thank you.
So the first question was: there's 136.37 million budget for the Children's Trust to deliver children's services. This is a demand-led service with unpredictable areas of spend, especially when the full effects of COVID are understood. Where in the budget is a contingency to cover extra funding. So part of that I think we've covered, but that's the first question on Children's Trust. And there is a second one which I'll come on to when Cathy responds to the first one.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to apologise to everybody that you can't see me, but the camera on my computer currently is not working, so I apologise for that. The figure quoted here is obviously for the contract across Northamptonshire of 13637, but the West share of this is estimated to be approximately 76 million. But after taking into account grant funding and other income, the net cost of the Children's Trust contract to the West is 68.3 million. There is a provision, and we have talked about this in a previous item of the for COVID, and that sits at 0.85 million in the West Northamptonshire draft budget for impact of COVID against the Children's Trust, and the provisional settlement that was announced of the 21-22 COVID grants that we've recently discussed. This calculation is actually based on the full-year effect of the staffing and care costs to support the forecast additional children coming into care 2021 due to COVID. So obviously, as we were aware before, this is a demand-led service, and COVID has been identified as that it may have an impact on the demand on the Children's Trust. This contract, this sum for COVID isn't actually included in the contract sum with the Trust, and it's actually held by the Council contingent upon the Trust providing evidence of demand. And as Anna outlined earlier, there has been some calculation done forecasting on the impact that might have happened within the Trust, and there are some areas where it has, and there are some areas where it hasn't. So any additional demand-led pressures would be dealt with in year or with some of the general contingency set aside within the budget plans. So I'll stop there.
Are there any questions on that? I think it has been covered to some extent with the questions on COVID. Ken Pritchard, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. What happens, and we know how unpredictable, these provision of services are for the Children's Trust. What happens if the situation evolves where all of the budget which has been allocated to the Children's Trust runs out? What happens then?
Okay.
Other than the contingency?
Okay, so the financial performance for the contract sum for the Trust was a 17-month contract sum, and it would be monitored by the financial mechanism. This is going really into question 2. If the Trust consider that they need some extra funding, they have to develop a business plan, which is then managed through a strict and robust governance structure as part of the contract that we have with the Trust. So we would hope that we would never get to a point where the money runs out, because we would hope that the Trust would be managing their finances within their contract sum. And if there were any extenuating circumstances that they needed some extra funding, then they would be building a business plan, and they would bring that to the commissioning groups. So there is a operational commissioning group, and there is also a strategic commissioning group which meet on a monthly basis, and any business plan or any request of any funding or resource would have to go through that scrutiny of those two groups.
So ultimately, the councils will actually have to provide additional funding.
The council would be scrutinising the request. It wouldn't always be looking to agree. I think that we would be working with the Trust to support and manage their financial mechanism before the council would be considering supplying any further funding. It would be contingent on a number of criteria that are set out in the contract. So such as the example we have at the moment, COVID is an unforeseen element of something that's happening. And so that would be seen as something that is possibly something that they would need to provide a business plan for.
Okay, thank you.
Anna, you've got, you'd like to come in here.
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair. Just to supplement, Kathy said, as you would expect, the contract does still ask that the Children's Trust in the first instance has to meet any extra demand or cost from its own reserves and or mitigate any demand pressures that it's got. But as you would expect as well, one of the key things to this is the performance indicators that are then used for the Trust and reported monthly that give us that early warning sign that something like that is happening. Because as members will know, for example, sometimes extra demand can be a question of practice. So are people being unduly risk averse and therefore bringing more children into the care system? Or actually, is it a wider demand we're seeing with other neighbours and statistical neighbours and more widely in the country? So the contractor monitoring allows for that sort of thing too. But as you know, in all these contracts, they do have to undertake actions themselves before they come to us, as they would in any council service if they were in-house as well as being in the trust.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions on that part of the section? I don't think we do. In a sense, I think the second question has been answered, Kathy, with your response to what happens when the Children's Trust approach the council with this business plan. Is there anything else anyone would like to ask about the Children's Trust? Because this was something that was very, very controversial when we were talking about it earlier. Or have all your questions been answered? No? Julie, Councillor Davenport.
Thank you. It's just one question. It's on page 53 under the Children's Trust for. It's got transport optimisation, which sort of pricked my ears up because of what happened before with send children without any consultation. They were told that they'd have to walk to bus stops, etc. And I'm wondering whether we should be concerned about that again. Review of transport requirements to reduce costs. 53.
Kathy, are you able to come back on that? Because it has been something that's been of great concern to the parents of these children with special needs.
Yes, and I can understandably so. I would have to seek some understanding in terms of what that might look like, because I wouldn't be thinking that we would be unnecessarily removing transport in terms of school within our guidance that we have to submit.
No, but if you could get back to me on that, please.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I think it's been a number of parents that you've been involved with on that, haven't there?
Yeah.
Councillor Davenport. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Are we coming to the end of our questions? Is there anything else that anybody would like to bring up before we move on to the next part of the agenda?
Yes.
Yes, Councillor Ritchie. Ken.
Tell me if this comment is sort of too off beam, but I have a concern over the very nature of the budget consultation that has now begun. I don't think that it takes residents and residents' views seriously. Residents, when anybody thinks about a budget, they think about what are the things that they would like to have, what are the services, what are the things that they would like to buy, and how does that match up with the amount of money that they can possibly have to put against it. They have got to prioritize. To me, any normal elector weighing up the budget and whether they like it or not are thinking about, well, what does this mean for the gritting of my roads? Well, the bus services that were cut, will these be reinstated? What does it actually mean for me? And is this a good package of expenditure that is going to provide me with what I want? Instead, the budget consultation is simply about the top level of what is the council tax going to be? What are the sort of bottom line figures in all of this? And it strikes me that there is not an opportunity. There is not even a mention for people as to what this actually means. Yes, the preamble makes it clear that that this balanced budget, which we need to have a balanced budget, but it can be delivered without any cuts in services. People will misinterpret that. It needs to be clear that what it is saying, that it can be delivered without any additional cuts in services. And I just feel that this is not the sort of consultation that I would like to see. We read from other parts of the world about local authorities that get involved in real engagement and participatory budgeting. This is just so far from that I really think that we need to flag it up as something that the new council ought to look at to how it operates in the future.
Right. I think that's probably a recommendation code to go forward from the committee then, Ken. Yeah. Okay. Right. Without any more questions, can we move?
No, mine was.
Oh, sorry, Judy, your hand. Yes, your hand's come back up.
Yes. I totally agree with Councillor Ritchie on that. I mean, because of all of the cutbacks we've been having to deal with anyway, that it would have been nice to have had some sweetness in there, especially being we're saying we're going to save money by having all the councils together, a unitary, and yet then we're asking them for 5% more. I just think that's a bit of a hard sell. Now, you may have mentioned this when I dropped off, but and it was in the questions before about pay for staff, because it wasn't sort of set in stone. It was just mentioned, like it's been mentioned before. We've got 2 million, we may be able to give them something, and we didn't before. Will we definitely give a pay rise this time?
Anna, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, so as the budget sets out at the moment, we have provision for something, including, as Martin said, for an uplift in national living wage where we need to do that, and also for contracted sum for children's. We're in discussion with the unions at the moment on not just pay, but increment performance and all the policies and things that go with that. Nothing has been decided at this point. We're working through that with the unions, and we're working through that with the executive, and then we'll come out with a final outcome to that in terms of what we're going to do. But we've been clear that we have made a provision. It's still subject to agreement.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Ken Pritchard.
So, sorry to come back again, but something that perhaps has not really been noticed is that obviously, when you consider council tax, and we've looked at the increase and so on, but nothing actually has been mentioned about the contribution that residents have to pay with regards to the police, fire and crime commissioner, which adds once again on top of existing demands, obviously, for council tax. So can you comment at all on that, or should we be emphasising it more that this is actually doesn't include that sort of contribution?
I think we just need to be clear that this is setting the budget for West Northamptonshire and not for the Police and Fire Commissioner. I think they will have their own draft budget, which they are out to consultation on at the moment. That will go into their Police and Fire panel, which is where they will agree that. But obviously we're concerned with West Northamptonshire, the services we provide and the cost of those services to our residents in relation to that.
What I was actually saying, I actually sit on the panel, so, but at the same token, it should actually be emphasised that that is in addition to what actually we're actually budgeting for here. Because otherwise, you know, people would think that that's all they've got to pay, and then you get the extra bit on top of that.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's a valid point, Ken. People wouldn't be looking for more, would they? They'd be very pleased that it was only the 4.99.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Right. I think we've probably completed that part of the agenda. I'm very aware that Anna, Jane, Kathy, you, and also probably Andrew, or the officers. I can't see you all, but you know, thank you very much. If you wish to leave at this point, apart from George have to stay with us. If you wish to leave, thank you very much for your contributions. It's been really, we really appreciate that, and I think it's been a session that I found incredibly interesting, and it's been good to see you here. So if you wish to leave now and go and do something else, that's fine. And thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Right. George, I'm afraid we're left with you to take us through the next part. And thank you for your forbearance in sitting through the agenda so far. So we're just looking at the executive forward plan and what we'll be doing leading up to the meeting at the end of March.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. So yes, the forward plan that you can see in front of you covers the period, the shadow exec meetings that we've got coming up. Another one towards the end of January, and then those in February, where we'll get the outcomes of the budget consultation that I think there's been an excellent scrutiny meeting this evening looking at that. You can see there on the 12th. We've also obviously got the Constitution going, and you can see there a range of other reports, which I'm not going to touch on. I suppose just to put this into context, there's 2 more meetings left of this overview and scrutiny committee. We've got a one on the 25th of January, so we've got 2 this month, where we're looking at the Constitution for West Northamptonshire Council. So no doubt another positive meeting will be had at that session. And then our final meeting is on the 2nd of March, where we'll be feeding back, on the 25th of January, the workshop sessions that you've been doing around the Constitution, the development of overview and scrutiny for the new West Northants Council. And then the meeting on the 2nd of March will be a summary of the work and a reflection on the work that you've undertaken in the last 10 months or so, as well as ensuring that that's taken forward into the new West Northants Authority. So whilst this forward plan is here and has been useful in the last 10 months in helping to inform the agenda items for this committee, as we've only got 2 meetings left and both are sort of occupied with agenda items, it's probably more for information, Chair, than anything else at this stage. But clearly, once those papers are published, members will be able to scrutinise at their leisure. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, George. Do you have any questions on that? Because we're really nearing the end of our programme, and as we move towards vesting day in April, our work will be done, and we'll have to bring all the work together in a report to present at the full council. So the Constitution will be the next agenda item that we'll be looking at on the 25th of January, and then the annual report in March. So anything that anyone would like to add to that? Any questions to George? No, I think that's very. If we could just confirm that Emma and James Hill will sort out between them attendance at the comms and the website working group, task and finish groups, and they can report back to us on that in a formal way at the meeting. And Councillor Davenport Julie will report to us before the next governance next government meeting that we have for the overview and scrutiny. So I'm getting muddled up with all these different committees. Right, that's item 7. I think we don't have any urgent business. I don't think anyone's been notified. Anything's been notified there, Tracy?
No, Chair.
No, and there are no exempt items on this agenda. So I thank you all for attending. And thank you to Councillor Rebecca Breeze for coming along and talking about the budget that she's been working so hard on. And also thank you again to the officers that have supported us on this tonight. And good night to everybody, and call the meeting closed. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks very much.